mount, maintaining the mount. There's some things I do that that are kind of unique to my game that I do, and I think this is where you start to see some limitations in your flexibility. If you have not worked certain stretches that help you specifically with your hip flexibility, this would be probably where you would want to do that. Okay, battery may get low on that. I don't know if it does. Just kill it. We'll move on. So maintaining the mount. One thing that just it really irks me is to see somebody in the mount and get rolled out. Okay, and it happens all the time. You could be completely like this right here, and somebody just bridges up hard, and they just manage to just roll you out of the mount. Well, problem with that is we've lost a fight finishing position. If it's a tournament, obviously we've probably lost the ability to finish that fight on top, even if we can't, hit a submission to end the match. So here, it's absolutely important that we always try to stay on top. Later, Seth. Thank you, brother. I'll see you tomorrow. It's very important that we stay on top at all times. And this is a deceiving position because you think that it's easier to stay on top than what it really is. It's actually quite difficult to learn how to maintain the mount because they have the ability to push off of the mat, okay? So there's a couple things that we have to understand here. When my weight is largely centered over their hips, they can massively affect me and by bucking me forward, bucking me to the left, bucking me to the right, whichever way they want to go, okay? So I always adhere to a principle of get to the high mount, right? As high as I can absolutely make it. I also immediately start telling all my fighters that when we start getting into mount, what's the first thing that we should start working on doing? Exactly, right? So you guys will learn. So we're going over this now. I'm going to tell you right now, the first thing that you start focusing on and working on is the elbows. Okay, don't worry about nothing else right now. If you've made it to the mount cleanly, let's work on those elbows and let's get those suckers high up above their head. There's some ways that we can do that, okay? The longer we stay down around their hips, the worse off this is. When you sit up, you see a lot of guys that sit up. Now, I'm going to be honest with you and tell you this, that you sit back, this is completely in the realm of years of balance, awareness, sensitivity. It is very difficult to maintain control here. So when you see a guy in the mount sitting here and kind of just playing around and people are bucking and all that, generally the guy's going to have quite a bit of time up under his belt. He's got really good balance because it's quite difficult to stay vertical here when somebody starts bucking you. The other thing you have to be aware of is from the top side position, we cannot let anybody control our posts. So I don't care what he grabs here so much, I can't let him control my posts at all. I don't want him grabbing my hand. So if a hand comes out right out here and he starts trying to feed inside, I want to maintain that outside position. So wherever his hands go, I want to make sure I try to maintain the outside position. The minute that his hands start working outside of mine, we've got problems. So if he gets his hands in here and his hands are now on the outside or close to the outside edge of mine, I got an issue. So as long as I keep my hands outboard and he stays inside my thumbs or inside my palms, back of my palms, I'm pretty safe. It's when he's allowed to pull my arms inside that I get into some problems here, okay? So what do? I try whenever I see him attacking one side is make some subtle changes, okay? Basic defense. So he reaches up and tries to grab one arm. The first thing that I start trying to do is I flare my elbow to the ceiling. I don't turn my elbow downward, all right? Because if I turn my elbow downward, if he can't over muscle me or out muscle me, he can pull my elbow on the inside, pin it. Now he rolls me over to the side and I'm done. So I don't want him taking my posts out. Okay, we're talking about these two posts right now. So if I see him start to grab something, the first thing that I do is I turn my elbow to the ceiling. Okay, so where now the first thing he has to do to remove that post from where it's fixed at is to get my elbow down and then get it pulled in. So he's got 2 steps instead of 1. So anywhere I'm at, he reaches and grabs something, I'm gonna get long, okay? I'm gonna kind of extend this out over here and I'm gonna get my elbow up and then I'm gonna come right back on the inside and I've got my elbows high. A lot of people make the mistake of they say Superman out, Superman out. Well, here's the problem with that. If you let the thumbs turn up, a lot of people have their hands here, it allows you to be rolled over, okay? So we always wanna make sure that we keep the thumbs turned outboard or turned inboard as far as possible so our elbows stay high so that he can't pull my elbows down. So the minute he starts to grab, I offset and get that elbow up high so that he can't break my elbow over. If I have to drop my elbow on this side, that's not that big of a deal because if he starts to come back up, I'm just gonna offset to the other side. Okay, so I can drop my elbows up on top and kind of float any which way to defend that. A lot of times in beginner jiu-jitsu, they teach us if he loops over my hands, they'll teach to pull your hand in here and circle it out, okay? The problem with that is that the second that he pulls your hand in, for a split second, you have to circle your hand back outside and he's got you in this trap, in this roll position, okay? So what I prefer to do is if he comes over the top of it, I prefer to go away and drop my shoulder into his face. Because when I drop the shoulder into his face, what does it do to my elbow? Rotates my elbow to the ceiling, right? Now, generally, they realize that's kind of futile, so they just back off of it, and then they come back to the inside, and they push me back over to the middle, right? Nobody likes getting a shoulder dropped across their face, but it's way the hell better than coming up underneath this way. It's like he loops on this side, my elbow gets caught down. First thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go away from it and get my elbow back to the ceiling, and then I'm gonna push back into it so I can get my elbow back up. Okay? That's your first drill. Partner's gonna come in here. You gotta put your hands any which way you want, and just he's just gonna throw the hand over. There's no resistance here. I'm pushing off. I'm gonna drop the shoulder into the face so that I can get my elbow back skyward, and I can get back into this position right here. Boom. Okay? Get back inside. Okay, if he comes back inside, I'm offsetting enough to this side. Here in a minute, we'll talk about head control. Close. 1, 2, 3. So, we've worked on peel and grips, sort of. Now, what we're going to look at is, from this position right here, is kind of body positioning, right? And how we can affect them momentarily. So, maintaining the mount is as much of an art as the art itself. There's a lot of little nuances to maintaining the mount. One of the things that I like to do is I like to really, really focus on head control. So a little secret that I have is when I'm down lower on my opponent, okay, and I'm expecting that they're going to start really, really moving their hips, and their elbows are super close like this. I have not been able to get their arms to the mat and start working to a high elbow position. Now, what I mean in high elbow is I start telling you, all of my athletes, I would like to ideally see you here or better here, okay? I want double high elbows above their head, forearm locks underneath, so that they're like this, and we want to be way up in their bicep and in their armpit area. That's ideally where we want to be. But most people that nowadays, especially since the high mount is really becoming a thing, they are really, really good at keeping their hands at their core, right? So something you realize is if their head is on the mat, they can really generate a lot of momentum when it comes to moving. So when I realized this, that when I don't affect their head, they can really buck a lot. Now what happens here is if he bucks, his hip drive transfers to his elbow, and now he can offset me further with the elbows. So he starts with the hips moving upward, and if he wants to take me off to the side, he can do so with his elbows because he's pushing away from his core, right? So he's got twice the leverage on me moving away. So if he bucks his hips up and lifts me, then it transfers to his elbows, and then he can offset me to whatever side he wants. And most of the time, he can affect the turn to one side or the other with that. How that looks, it's going to be hip, elbows, turn. And then this is where you wind up a lot of times seeing that they catch this on a 2-on-1 escape, all the stuff that we use for our escape. Now we're in trouble. Okay, we're in trouble. We have no way to get out of this. So we want to stop that before he gets really rolling on that, okay? So if I realize he's doing really great at keeping his elbows tight, I'm going to go over some other techniques a little bit later on this about how we can really peel their elbows out. But if he's doing really good and I can't get him out, can't affect anything on him, one of the things I know is if he's fixing to buck, I'm going to come right up underneath the head. Yeah, you stop because you already know that, you jerk. I'm going to come right up underneath the head, and I'm going to pull his head up. I'm just going to lift it up, and I'm going to rest my elbow right here. I want one hand for a post, and I just want to keep his head off the ground. I'm not trying not trying to neck crank him. I'm just keeping his head off of the mat. And I'm keeping my hand off of the mat. I don't want him to be able to place his head on the mat because something interesting happens here. You tell him to lift his hips with his head on the mat, he's really good at it, right? He can lift way up. Lift your hips. He can lift way up, okay? Something interesting happens when I pick his head off the mat. Lift your hips up. Go ahead and lift. Lift your hips up. It's very difficult for him to generate any effective momentum when his head is off the mat, right? Because as he lifts his hips, he's driving his head further into his chest. So if we leave his head down, he can generate that extra momentum by pushing off of the mat with his head, his shoulders and his head. So if I pick all this up off the mat and I'm just cradling this, it takes about half of the effectiveness and the power out of his hip drive. He doesn't lift near as hard if I just hold his head up off of the mat, right? Now I can't do that the whole time, okay? So first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna experiment with this, lifting the head off the mat, and then you're gonna put the head back down. He's gonna lift really hard and push away, okay? Then we're gonna come back here, pull the head off the mat, and he's gonna do the same thing, right? You're gonna see that's about half the power that he would normally have. Okay, so right off of this, as soon as he hits this, as soon as he hits that hip and he comes back down, we're gonna settle with the opposite hand, okay, reaches up underneath. Now, what just happened here is exactly what always happens. One elbow is gonna isolate itself. So I shot my hand underneath and I'm gonna pull that head all the way to the side. My forehead is gonna go onto the mat. Okay, so now I've got his head turned this way, which means he can only go which way? He can only turn that way. He's not turning this way because my shoulder is blocking his face. Okay, so from here now, I can sprawl this hand way out wide. I'm nice and I'm effective. I can start working on maintaining my bottom side lock. Okay, so this is our control position for right now. We'll work that. Here we go. 1, 2, 3.